The back wall of the Strategium had been removed during the fighting on Istvan III, revealing a fully fashioned temple adjoining the Vengeful Spirit's bridge. The War Master sat alone. None dared disturb his bitter reveries as he sat brooding on the conflict raging below. What should have been a massacre had turned into a war he could ill afford the time to wage. Despite his brave words to his brother Primarchs, the battle on Istvan III worried him. Not for any fear that his warriors would lose, but for the fact that they were engaged at all. The virus bombing should have killed every one of those he believed would not support him in his campaign to topple the Emperor from the golden throne of terror. Instead, the first cracks had appeared in what should have been a faultless plan. Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children had taken a warning to the surface. And the Eisenstein. He remembered Malakhurst's fear as he had come to tell him of the debacle with the Remembrancers, the fear that the War Master's wrath would prove his undoing. Malakhurst had limped towards the throne with his hooded head cast down. "What is it, Malakhurst?" Horus had demanded. "They are gone," said Malakhurst. "Sinderman, Ollerton, and Keeler." "What do you mean?" "They are not amongst the dead in the audience chamber," explained Malakhurst. "I checked every corpse myself." "You say they are gone?" asked the War Master at last. "That implies you know where they have gone. Is that the case?" "I believe so, my lord," nodded Malakhurst. "It appears they boarded a Thunderhawk and flew to the Eisenstein." "They stole a Thunderhawk," repeated Horus. "We are going to have to review our security procedures regarding these new craft. First Saul Tarvitz and now these Remembrancers. It seems anyone can steal one of our ships with impunity." "They did not steal it on their own," explained Malakhurst. "They had help." "Help? From whom?" "I believe it was Yakton Cruz. There was a struggle, and Maggard was killed." "Yakton Cruz," laughed Horus mirthlessly. "We have seen no shortage of wonders, but perhaps this is the greatest of them. The half-herd growing a conscience." "I have failed in this, War Master." "It is not a question of failure, Malakhurst. Mistakes like this should never occur. More and more of my efforts are distracted from this battle. Tell me, where is the Eisenstein now?" "It attempted to break through our blockade to reach the system jump point." "You say attempted," noted Horus. "It did not succeed." Malakhurst paused before answering. "Several of our ships intercepted the Eisenstein and heavily damaged it." "But they did not destroy it?" "No, my lord. Before they could do so, the Eisenstein's commander made an emergency jump into the warp, but the ship was so badly damaged that we do not believe it could survive such a translation." "If it does, then the whole timetable of my designs will be disrupted." "The warp is dark, War Master. It is unlikely that—" "Do not be so sure of yourself, Malakhurst," warned Horus. "The Istvan V phase is critical to our success, and if the Eisenstein carries word of our plans to Terra, then all may be lost." "Perhaps, War Master, if we were to withdraw from the Coral City and blockade the planet, we could ensure that the Istvan V phase proceeds as planned." "I am the War Master, and I do not back down from a battle," shouted Horus. "There are goals to be won in the Coral City that you cannot comprehend." Horus was shaken from his memories by the chiming of the communications array fitted into the arm of his throne. "This is the War Master." A holomat installed beneath the floor projected a large square plane on which swirled an image high above the War Master's temple. The image resolved into the face of Lord Commander Eidolon, evidently inside his command Land Raider. The sound of distant explosions washed through the static. "War Master," said Eidolon, "I bring news that I feel you should hear." "Tell me," said Horus, "and it had better be good news." "Oh, it is, my lord," said Eidolon. "Well, don't drag this out, Eidolon," warned Horus. "Tell me." "We have an ally inside the palace." "An ally? Who?" "Lucius." The aftermath of a battle was the worst part. An Astartes warrior was used to the tension of waiting for an attack to come, and even the din and pain of battle itself, but Loken never wished for a time without war more than when he saw what was left after the battle had finished. He didn't experience fear or despair in the manner of a mortal man, but he felt sorrow and guilt as they did. Angron's latest attack had been one of the fiercest yet, the Primarch himself leading it, charging through the ruins of the palace dome towards Loken's defenses. Thousands of blood-covered world-eaters had followed him, and many of those warriors still lay where they had fallen. Once this place had been part of the palace, a handsome garden with summer houses, ornamental lakes, and a roof that opened up to the sun. Now it was a rubble-strewn ruin. Its roof collapsed, and only an incongruous decorated post, or the splintered remains of an ornamental bridge, remaining of its finery. The bodies of the world-eaters were concentrated on the forward barricade, a line of heaped rubble and metal spikes constructed by the lunar wolves. Angron had attacked it in force, and Torgadon had relinquished it, letting the world-eaters die for it before his Astartes fell back to the defenses at the entrance of the palace's central dome. The ruse had worked, and the world-eaters had been strung out as they charged at Loken's position. Many had died to the guns Tarvitz had stationed above the barricades, and by the time Loken's sword had left its sheath, it was only momentum that kept the world-eaters fighting. Victory was beyond them. Lunar wolves were mixed in with the world-eaters dead, warriors Loken had known for years. Although the sounds of battle had faded, Loken fancied he could still hear echoes of the fighting, chain blades ripping through armor, and volleys of bolter rounds splitting the air. "It was a close-run thing, Garviel," said a voice from behind Loken. "But we did it." Loken glanced round to see Saul Tarvitz emerging from the central dome. Loken smiled as he saw his friend and battle brother, a man who had come a long way from the line officer he had been back on Murder to command the survivors of Horus's treachery. "Angron will be back," said Loken. "Their ruse failed, though," said Tarvitz. "They don't need to break in, Saul," said Loken. "Horus will whittle us down until there's no one left. Then Eidolon and Angron can just roll over us." "Not forgetting the War Master's sons of Horus," said Tarvitz. Loken shrugged. "There's no need for them to get involved yet. Eidolon wants the glory, and the World-Eaters are hungry for blood. The War Master will happily let the other legions wear us down before they strike." "That's changed," said Tarvitz. "What do you mean?" "I've just had word from Lucius," explained Tarvitz. "He tells me that his communications specialists have broken the Sons of Horus communiques. Some old friends of yours are coming down from the Vengeful Spirit to lead the Legion." Loken turned from the battlefield, suddenly interested. "Who?" "Ezekiel Abaddon and Horus Aximand," said Tarvitz. "Apparently they are to bring the War Master's own wrath down upon the city. The Sons of Horus will be playing their hands soon enough, I think." Abaddon and Aximand, the arch-traitors, men Loken had admired for so long, and the heart of the Mournival. Both warriors stood at Horus's right hand, and possibilities flashed through Loken's mind. Deprived of the last of its Mournival, a crucial part of the Legion would die, and it would start unraveling without such inspirational figureheads. "Saul, are you certain?" asked Loken urgently. "As sure as I can be, but Lucius seems pretty excited by the news." "Did this intercept say where they would be landing?" demanded Loken. "It did," smiled Lucius. "The Makaran Basilica, just beyond the palace. It's a big temple with a spire in the shape of a trident." "I have to find Tarek." "He is with Nero Vipus, helping Vaden with the wounded." "Thank you for bringing me this news, Saul," said Loken with a cruel smile. "This changes everything." Lucius peered past the bullet-riddled pillar, scanning through the darkness of one of the many battlefields scattered throughout the ruins of the palace. Bodies, bolters, and chain axes lay on the shattered tiles where they had been dropped, and many of the bodies were still locked in their last, fatal combat. It had not been difficult for Lucius to slip out of the palace. The biggest danger had been the snipers of the recon squads the War Master's forces had deployed among the ruins. Lucius had spied movement in the ruined buildings several times and had taken cover in shell craters or behind heaps of corpses. Squirming through the filth and darkness like an animal, it had been humiliating, though the sights, sounds, and smells of these battlefields still filled his senses in an arousing way. He stepped warily into the courtyard. The bodies that lay everywhere had been butchered, hacked apart with chain blades, or battered to death with fists. It was an ugly spectacle, yet he relished the image of how intense their deaths must have been. No artistry, he said to himself, as a gold and purple armored figure detached from the shadows. A score of warriors followed him, and Lucius smiled as he recognized Lord Commander Eidolon. "Lord Commander," said Lucius, "it is a pleasure to stand before you once more." "Damn your blandishments," spat Eidolon. "You are a traitor twice over." "That's as may be," said Lucius, slouching on a fallen pillar of black marble. "But I am here to give you what you want." "Huh," scoffed Eidolon. "What can you give us, traitor?" "Victory," said Lucius. "Victory?" laughed Eidolon. "You think we need your help to give us that? We have you in a vice. One by one, death by death, victory will be ours." "And how many warriors will you lose to achieve it?" retorted Lucius. "How many of Fulgrim's chosen are you willing to throw into a battle that should never have been fought at all? You can end this right now, right here, and keep all your Astartes alive for the real battle. When the Emperor sends his reply to Horus's treachery, you will need every single one of your battle brothers, and you know it." "And what would be your price for this invaluable help?" asked Eidolon. "Simple," said Lucius. "I want to rejoin the Legion." Eidolon laughed in his face, and Lucius felt the song of death surge painfully through his body. But he forced its killing music back down inside him. "Are you serious, Lucius?" demanded Eidolon. "What makes you think we want you back?" "You need someone like me, Eidolon. I want to be part of a legion that respects my skills and ambition. I am not content to stay a captain for the rest of my life like that wretch Tarvitz. I will be at Fulgrim's side where I belong." "Tarvitz?" spat Eidolon. "Does he still live?" "He lives," nodded Lucius, "although I will gladly kill him for you. The glory of this battle should be mine, yet he lords over us all as if he is one of the chosen." Lucius felt his bitterness rise and fought to maintain his composure. He was once happy to trudge alongside his warriors and leave better men to the glory. But he has chosen this battle to discover his ambition. It's thanks to him that I'm down here at all. "You ask for a great deal of trust, Lucius," said Eidolon. "I do. But think what I can give you. The palace, Tarvitz. We will have these things anyway. We are a proud legion, Lord Commander, but we never send our brothers to their deaths to prove a point. We follow the orders of the War Master in all things," replied Eidolon guardedly. "Indeed," noted Lucius. "But what if I said I can give you a victory so sudden it will be yours, and yours alone? The World Eaters and the Sons of Horus will only flounder in your wake." Lucius could see he had caught Eidolon's interest, and suppressed a smile. Now, all he had to do was reel him in. "Speak," commanded Eidolon. "I'm coming with you, Garvey," said Nero Vipers, walking into the only dome of the palace not to be ruined by the siege. It had once been an auditorium with a stage and rows of gilded seats, where the music of creation had once played to the choral city's elite, but now it was mouldering and dark. Loken rose from his battle meditation, seeing Vipers standing before him, and said, "I knew you would wish to come, but this is something Tarek and I have to do alone." "Alone?" said Vipers. "That's madness. Ezekiel and Little Horus are the best soldiers the Legion has ever had. You can't go up against them alone." Loken placed his hand on his friend's shoulder and said, "The palace will fall soon enough, with or without Tarek and me. Saul Tarvitz has done unimaginable things in keeping us all alive as long as he has, but ultimately the palace will fall." "Then what's the point of throwing your life away hunting down Ezekiel and Little Horus?" demanded Vipers. "We only have one goal, Honest Fan 3, Nero, and that's to hurt the War Master. If we can kill the last of the Mournival, then the War Master's plans suffer. Nothing else matters." "You said we were supposed to be holding the traitors here, while the Emperor sent the other legions to save us. Is that not true anymore? Are we on our own?" Loken shook his head and retrieved his sword from where he had propped it against the wall. "I don't know, Nero. Maybe the Emperor has sent the legions to rescue us. Maybe he hasn't. But we have to assume that we're on our own. I'm not going to fight with nothing but blind hope to keep me going. I'm going to make a stand." "That's what I want to do," said Vipers. "At my friend's side." "No,
You need to stay here, said Loken. Your stand must be made here. Every minute you keep the traitors here is another minute for the Emperor to bring the War Master to justice. This killing is Mournival business, Nero. Do you understand?
Frankly, no, said Nero. But I will do as you ask, and stay here.
Loken smiled.
Don't mourn me yet, Nero. Tarek and I may yet prevail.
You'd better, said Vipus. The Lunar Wolves need you.
Loken felt humbled by Nero's words, and embraced his oldest friend. He dearly wished he could tell him that there was yet hope, and that he expected to return alive from this mission.
Garville,
said a familiar voice from the entrance to the dome. Loken and Nero released each other from their brotherly embrace, and saw Saul Tarvitz framed in the wan light of the auditorium's entrance.
Saul,
said Loken.
It's time,
said Tarvitz.
We're ready to create the diversion you requested.
Loken nodded and smiled at the two brave warriors, men he had fought through hell for, and would do so 100 times more. The honor they did him just by being his friends made his chest swell with pride.
Captain Loken,
said Tarvitz formally.
It may be that this is the last time we will meet.
I do not think, replied Loken, there is any maybe about it.
Then I will wish you all speed, Garville.
All speed, Saul, said Loken, offering his hand to Tarvitz. For the Emperor.
For the Emperor,
echoed Tarvitz. With his farewells said, Loken made his way from the auditorium, leaving Tarvitz and Vipus to organize the defenses for the next attack. Surviving tactical maps indicated that the Makaram Basilica lay to the north of their position, and as he made his way towards the point he had selected as the best place to leave the palace, he found Torgadden waiting for him.
You saw Vipus?
asked Torgadden.
I did,
nodded Loken.
He wanted to come with us.
Torgadden shook his head.
This is Mournival business.
That's what I told him. Both warriors took deep breaths as the enormity of what they were about to attempt swept over them once again.
Ready?
asked Loken.
No,
said Torgadden.
You?
No. Torgadden chuckled as he turned to the tunnel that led from the palace.
Aren't we a pair?
he said, and Loken followed him into the darkness. For good or ill, the final battle for Istvan III was upon them.
You dare return to me in failure?
Bellowed Horus, and the bridge of the vengeful spirit shook with the fury of his voice. His face twisted in anger at the wondrous figure standing before him, struggling to comprehend the scale of this latest setback.
Do you even understand what I am trying to do here?
Raged Horus.
What I have started at Istvan will consume the whole galaxy, and if it is flawed from the outset, then the Emperor will break us.
Fulgrim appeared uncowed by his anger, his brother's features betraying an insouciance quite out of character for the Primarch of the Emperor's children. Though he had but recently arrived on his flagship, Pride of the Emperor, Fulgrim looked as magnificent as ever. His exquisite armor was a work of art in purple and gold, bearing many new embellishments and finery, with a flowing fur-lined cape swathing his body. More than ever, Horus thought Fulgrim looked less like a warrior and more like a rake or libertine. His brother's long white hair was pulled back in an elaborate pattern of plaits, and his pale cheeks were lightly marked with what appeared to be the beginnings of tattoos.
Ferrus Manus is a dull fool who would not listen to reason, said Fulgrim. Even the mention of the Mechanicum's pledge did not...
You swore to me that you could sway him. The Iron Hands were essential to my plans. I planned Istvan III with your assurance that Ferrus Manus would join us. Now I find that I have yet another enemy to contend with. A great many of our Astartes will die because of this, Fulgrim.
What would you have me do, War Master? Smiled Fulgrim, and Horus wondered where this new, sly, mocking tone had come from. His will was stronger than I anticipated.
Or you simply had an inflated opinion of your own abilities.
Would you have me kill our brother, War Master? Asked Fulgrim.
Perhaps I will, replied Horus, unmoved. It would be better than leaving him to roam free to destroy our plans. As it is, he could reach the Emperor or one of the other Primarchs and bring them all down on our heads before we are ready.
Then if you are quite finished with me, I shall return to my legion, said Fulgrim, turning away.
Horus felt his choler rise at Fulgrim's infuriating tone and said, "No, you will not. I have another task for you. I am sending you to Istvan V. With all that has happened, the Emperor's response is likely to arrive more quickly than anticipated, and we must be prepared for it. Take a detail of Emperor's children to the alien fortresses there and prepare it for the final phase of the Istvan operation." Fulgrim recoiled in disgust. "You would consign me to a role little better than a castellan, as some prosaic housekeeper making it ready for your grand entrance? Why not send for Perturabo? This kind of thing is more to his liking." "Perturabo has his own role to play," said Horus. "Even now he prepares to lay waste to his homeworld in my name. We shall be hearing more of our bitter brother very soon. Have no fear of that. Then give this task to Mortarion. His grimy foot-sloggers will relish such an opportunity to muddy their hands for you," spat Fulgrim. "My legion was the chosen of the Emperor in the years when he still deserved our service. I am the most glorious of his heroes and the right hand of this new crusade. This is a betrayal of the very principles for which I chose to join you, Horus." "Betrayal," said Horus, his voice low and dangerous. "A strong word, Fulgrim. Betrayal is what the Emperor forced upon us when he abandoned the galaxy to pursue his quest for godhood and gave over the conquests of our crusade to scriveners and bureaucrats. Is that the charge you would level at me now, to my face, here on the bridge of my own ship?" Fulgrim took a step back, his anger fading, but his eyes alight with the excitement of the confrontation. "Perhaps I do, Horus. Perhaps someone needs to tell you a few home truths now that your precious Mournival is no more." "That sword," said Horus, indicating the venom-sheened weapon that hung low at Fulgrim's waist. "I gave you that blade as a symbol of my trust in you, Fulgrim. We alone know the true power that lies within it. That weapon almost killed me, and yet I gave it away. Do you think I would give such a weapon to one I do not trust?" "No, War Master," said Fulgrim. "Exactly. The Istvan V phase of my plan is the most critical," said Horus, stoking the dangerous embers of Fulgrim's ego. "Even more so than what is happening below us. I can entrust it to no other. You must go to Istvan V, my brother. All depends on its success." For a long, frightening moment, violent potential crackled between Horus and the Primarch of the Emperor's children. Fulgrim laughed and said, "Now you flatter me, hoping my ego will coerce me into obeying your orders." "Is it working?" asked Horus, as the tension drained away. "Yes," admitted Fulgrim. "Very well. The War Masters will be done. I will go to Istvan V." "Eidolon will stay in command of the Emperor's children until we join you at Istvan V," said Horus, and Fulgrim nodded. "He will relish the chance to prove himself further," said Fulgrim. "Now leave me, Fulgrim," said Horus. "You have work to do." Chapter 16. Enemy Within. The Eightfold Path. Honor must be satisfied. Apothecary Vaden fought to save Casto's life. The upper half of the warrior's armor had been removed, and his bare torso was disfigured by a gory wound. Flaps of skin and chunks of muscle blown aside like the petals of a bloody flower by an exploding bolt-around. "Pressure!" said Vaden, as he flicked over the settings on his Narthesium gauntlet. Scalpels and syringes cycled as Brother Mathredon, an Emperor's children Astartes, who had lost a hand in the earlier fighting and served as Vaden's assistant, kept pressure on the wound. Casto bucked underneath him, his teeth gritted against pain that would kill anyone but an Astartes. Vaden selected a syringe and pushed it into Casto's neck. The vial mounted on the gauntlet emptied, pumping Casto's system with stimulants to keep his heart forcing blood around his ruptured organs. Casto shook, nearly snapping the needle. "Hold him still," snapped Vaden. "Yes," said a voice behind him. "Hold him still. It will make it easier to kill him." Vaden's head snapped up, and he saw a warrior clad in the armor of an Emperor's Children Lord Commander. He carried an enormous hammer, purple arcs of energy playing around its massive head. Behind the warrior, Vaden could see a score of Emperor's children in purple and gold finery, their armor sheened with lapping powder and oil. Instantly, he knew that these were no loyalists, and felt a cold hand clutch at his chest as he saw that they were undone. "Who are you?" demanded Vaden, though he knew the answer already. "I am your death, traitor," said Eidolon, swinging his hammer and crushing Vaden's skull with one blow. Hundreds of Emperor's children streamed into the palace from the east, on a tide of fire and blood. They fell upon the wounded first, Eidolon himself butchering those who lay waiting for Vaden's ministrations, taking particular relish in killing the loyalist Emperor's children he found there. The warriors of his chapter swarmed through the palace around him, the defenders discovering to their horror that their flank had somehow been turned, and that more and more of the traitors were pouring into the palace. Within moments, the last battle had begun. The loyalists turned from their defenses and faced the Emperor's children. Assault marines' jump packs gunned them across ruined domes to crash into Eidolon's assault units. Heavy weapons troopers and snipers amongst the ruined battlements shot down into the enemy, swapping tremendous volleys of fire across the shattered domes. It was a battle without lines or direction as the fighting spilled into the heart of the Precentor's palace. Each Astartes became an army of his own as all order broke down and every warrior fought alone against the enemies that surrounded him. Emperor's children jetbikes screamed insanely through the precincts of the palace and ripped crazed circuits around the domes, spraying fire into the Astartes battling below them. Dreadnoughts tore up chunks of fallen masonry with their mighty fists and hurled them at the loyalists holding the barricades against which so many of their foes had died only a short while before. Everything was swirling madness, horror, and destruction, with Eidolon at the center of it, swinging his hammer and killing all who came near him as he led his perfect warriors deeper into the heart of the defenses. Luke Sedire, with his blonde hair and smirking grin, looked completely out of place among the rusting industrial spires of the Coral City. Beside him, Sergar Targost, captain of the 7th Company, seemed far more at home, his older, darker skin and heavy fur cloak more in keeping with a murdered world. Sedire stood on top of a rusting slab of fallen machinery before thousands of sons of Horus arrayed for war. War paint was fresh on their breastplates, and new banners dedicated to the warrior lodges flapped in the wind. "Sons of Horus!" bellowed Sedire, his voice brimming with the confidence that came to him so easily. "For too long we have waited for our brother legions to open the gate for us, so we can put the doubters and the feeble-minded to the sword. At last, the hour has come. Lord Commander Eidolon has broken the siege, and the time has come to show the legions how the sons of Horus fight." The warriors cheered, and the lodge banners were raised high, displaying the facets of the beliefs underpinning the lodge philosophies. A brazen claw reached down from the sky to crush a world in its fist. A black star shone 8 rays of death upon a horde of enemies, and a great winged beast with 2 heads stood resplendent on a mountain of corpses. Images from beyond, conjured by the words of Davenite priests who could look into the warp. They displayed the sons of Horus's allegiance to the powers their warmaster embraced. "The enemy is in disarray," shouted Sedire over the cheering. "We will fall upon them and sweep them away. You know your duties, sons of Horus, and you all know that the paths you have followed have led you towards this day. For here we destroy the last vestiges of the old crusade and march towards the future." Sedire's confidence was infectious, and he knew they were ready. Targost stepped forward and raised his hands. He bore the rank of lodge captain himself, privy to the secrets of the Davenite ways, and as much a holy man as a commander. He opened his mouth and unleashed a stream of brutal syllables, guttural and dark, the tongue of Davin wrought into a prayer of victory and blood. The sons of Horus answered the prayer, their voices raised in a relentless chant that echoed around the dead spires of the Coral City. And when the prayers were done, the sons of Horus marched to war. Fire stormed around Tarvitz. Emperor's children Terminators raked the central dome with fire, and the sounds of brutal hand-to-hand combat came from the shattered gallery. Tarvitz ducked and ran as bolt of fire kicked up fragments around him, sliding into cover beside Brother Solathan of Squad Nasicae.
Solathan and about 30 loyalist Emperor's children were pinned down behind a great fallen column, a few lunar wolves among them.
What in the Emperor's name happened?
Shouted Tarvitz.
How did they get in?
I don't know, sir, replied Solathan. They came from the east.
We should have had some warning,
said Tarvitz.
That's Lucius's sector. Have you seen him at all?
Lucius? Asked Solathan. No. He must have fallen. Tarvitz shook his head.
Not likely. I have to find him.
We can't hold out here, said Solathan. We have to pull back and we won't be able to wait for you. Tarvitz nodded, but he knew that he had to try and find Lucius, even if it was just to recover his body. He doubted Lucius could ever really die, but he knew that, amid this carnage, anything was possible.
Very well,
said Tarvitz.
Go. Fall back in good order to the inner domes of the temple. There are barricades there. Go! And don't wait for me!
He put his head briefly over the pillar and fired his bolter, kicking a burst of shots towards Eidolon's Emperor's children, swarming all over the far side of the dome. More covering fire sprayed from his warriors' guns as they began falling back by squads. The dome between him and his goal was littered with bodies, some of them chewed into unrecognizable sprays of torn flesh. He waited until his warriors had put enough distance between them and the enemy and broke from cover. Bolter shots tore up the ground beside him, and he rolled into the cover of a fallen pillar, crawling as fast as he could to reach the passageway that led from the dome and curved around its columned circumference towards the east wing of the precentor's palace. Lucius was somewhere in these ruins, and Tarvitz had to find him. Loken ducked and threw himself to the floor, skidding along the fire-blackened tiles of the plaza. The palace loomed above him, whirling as Loken spun on his back and fired up at the closest World Eater. One shot caught the warrior in the leg, and he collapsed in a roaring heap. Torgadden leapt upon him, plunging his sword into the traitor's back. Loken climbed to his feet as more fire stuttered across the plaza. He tried to get a bearing on the enemy among the heaps of the dead and the jagged slabs of marble sticking up from the edges of shell craters, but it was impossible. The plaza between the chaos of the palace and the dark mass of the city was infested with World Eaters, charging forwards to exploit the breach made by the Emperor's children.
There's a whole squad out here,
said Torgadden, wrenching his sword from the World Eater.
We're right in the middle of them.
Then we keep going, said Loken. Back on his feet, he reloaded his bolter as they hurried through the wreckage and charnel heaps, scanning the darkness for movement. Torgadden kept close behind him, sweeping his bolter between chunks of tiling or fallen masonry. Fire snapped around them, and the sounds of battle coming from the palace became ever more terrible, the war cries and explosions tearing through the violent night.
Down!
Yelled Torgadden, as a burst of plasma fire lanced from the darkness. Loken threw himself to the ground as the searing bolt flashed past him and bored a hole in a slab of fallen stone behind him. A dark shape came at him, and Loken saw the flash of a blade, bringing his bolter up in an instinctive block. He felt chain blade teeth grinding against the metal of his gun and kicked out at his attacker's groin. The World Eater pivoted away from the blow easily, turning to smash Torgadden to the ground with the butt of his chain axe. Torgadden's attack gave Loken a chance to regain his feet, and he threw aside the ruined bolter to draw his own sword. Torgadden wrestled with another World Eater on the ground, but his friend would have to fend for himself, as Loken saw that his opponent was a captain, and not just any captain, but one of the World Eater's best.
Khan,
said Loken, as the warrior attacked. Khan paused in his attack, and for the briefest moment, Loken saw the noble warrior he had spoken with in the Museum of Conquest, before something else swamped it again, something that twisted Khan's face with hatred. That second was enough for Loken, allowing him to dodge back behind a fan of broken stone, jutting from the edge of the crater. Bullets still carved through the air, and somewhere beyond his sight, Torgadden was fighting his own battle, but Loken could not worry about that now.
what happened, Khan?
Cried Loken.
What did they turn you into?
Khan screamed an incoherent bellow of rage and leapt towards him with his axe held high. Loken braced his stance and brought his blade up to catch Khan's axe as it slashed towards him, and the two warriors clashed in a desperate battle of strength.
Khan!
Said Loken through gritted teeth, as the World Eater forced the chain axe's whirling teeth towards his face.
This is not the man I knew. What have you become?
As their eyes met, Loken saw Khan's soul and despaired. He saw the warrior who had sworn oaths of brotherhood and pledged himself to the crusade, as he himself had done,
The warrior who had seen the terrors and tragedies of the crusade as well as its victories. And he saw the dark madness that had swamped that in bloodshed and betrayals yet to be enacted.
I am the Eightfold Path,
snapped Khan, his every words punctuated by a froth of blood.
No,
shouted Loken, pushing the World Eater away.
It doesn't have to be this way. It does,
said Khan.
There is no way off the path. We must always go further.
The humanity drained from Khan's face, and Loken knew that the World Eater was truly gone, and that only in death would this battle end. Loken backed away, fending off a flurry of blows from Khan's axe, until he was forced back against a slab of rubble. His foe's axe buried itself in the stone beside him, and Loken slammed the pommel of his sword into Khan's head. Khan rode the blow and smashed his forehead into Loken's face, grabbing his sword arm and wrestling him to the ground. They struggled in the mud like animals, Khan trying to grind Loken's face into the shattered stone, and Loken trying to throw him off. Loken rolled onto his back as he heard the rumble of an engine like an earthquake, and the glare of floodlights stabbed out and threw Khan's outline into silhouette. Knowing what was coming, Loken hammered his fist into Khan's face over and over again, pushing him upright with a hand clasped around his neck. The World Eater struggled in Loken's grip as the light grew stronger and the roaring form of a land raider crested the ridge of rubble behind them like a monster rising from the deep. Loken felt the huge impact as the land raider's dozer blade slammed into Khan, the sharpened prongs at its base punching through the World Eater's chest. He released Khan's body and rolled to the edge of the crater as the land raider rose up, carrying the struggling Khan with it. The mighty tank crashed back down, and Loken pressed his body into the mud as it ground over him, the roaring of its engine passing inches above him. Then it was over. The tank rumbled onwards, carrying the impaled World Eater before it like some gory trophy. Tanks were all around him, the eye of Horus glaring from their armored hulls, and Loken recognized the livery they were painted in. The Sons of Horus. For a moment, Loken just stared at the force surging towards the palace. Gunfire flared as they drove towards their prize. A hand reached down and grabbed Loken, dragging him, battered and bloody, into cover from the guns of the tanks. He looked up and saw Torgadden, similarly mauled by the encounter with the World Eaters. Torgadden nodded in the direction of the Land Raider.
Was that...
Khan, nodded Loken.
He's gone. Dead?
Maybe. I don't know. Torgadden looked up at the Sons of Horus spear tip, driving for the palace.
I think even Tarvitz might have trouble holding the palace now.
Then we'll have to hurry.
Yes. Stay low, and let's keep out of any more trouble,
said Torgadden.
Unless Abaddon and Little Horus aren't challenging enough on their own.
Saul will make them pay for every piece of rubble they capture, said Loken, pulling himself painfully to his feet. Khan had hurt him, but not so much that he couldn't fight. For his sake, let's make that count for something. The two friends forged through the rubble once again, towards the Makaran Basilica, where lay one last chance of a victory, on Istvan III. The sounds of battle echoed from all around him, and Tarvitz hugged the shadows as he made his careful way through the ruins of the east wing of the palace. Squads of Emperor's children swarmed through the palace grounds, sweeping through the shattered domes, and gunfire riddled rooms as they plunged the knife of their attack into the heart of the defenses. Here and there he saw squad markings he recognized, and had to fight the ingrained urge to call out to them. But these warriors were the enemy, and there would be no brotherly embrace or comradely welcome were they to discover him. The very obsessiveness of their attack was working in Tarvitz's favor, as these warriors possessed the same single-mindedness as Eidolon, fixated on the prize of the palace rather than proper battlefield awareness. For once, Eidolon's flaws were working in his favor, thought Tarvitz, as he ghosted through the strobe-lit wastelands of the palace.
You're going to need to tighten up discipline, Eidolon, he whispered, or someone's going to make you pay.
The eastern sectors he had assigned Lucius and his men to watch over were bombed-out ruins, the frescoes burned from the walls by the firestorm, and the mighty statue gardens pulverized by constant shelling and the battles that had raged furiously over the past months. To have held out this long was a miracle in itself, and Tarvitz was not blind enough to try and fool himself into thinking that it could last much longer. He saw dozens of bodies and checked every one for a sign that the swordsman had fallen. Each body was a warrior he knew, a warrior who had followed him into battle at the palace and trusted that he could lead them to victory.
Each set of eyes accused him of their death, but he knew that there was nothing more he could have done. The further eastward he went, the less he encountered the invading Emperor's children, their attack pushing into the center of the Precentor's palace, rather than spreading out to capture its entirety. Trust Eidolon to go for the glory, rather than standard battlefield practice. Give me 100 Space Marines, and I would punish your arrogance, thought Tarvitz. Even as the thought occurred to him, a slow smile spread across his face. He had 100 Space Marines. True, they were engaged in battle, but if any force of warriors could disengage from battle in good order and hand over to a friendly force in the middle of a desperate firefight, it was the Emperor's children. He crouched in the shadow of a fallen statue and opened a Vox channel.
Solithan,
He hissed.
can you hear me?
Static washed from the Vox bead in his ear, and he cursed at the idea of his plan being undone by something as trivial as a failure of communications.
I hear you, Captain, but we're a little busy right now, said Solithan's voice.
Understood,
Said Tarvitz.
but I have new orders for you. Disengage from the fight and hand over to the Lunar Wolves. Let them take the brunt of the fighting, and gather as many warriors as you can rally to you. Then converge on my position. Sir, take the eastern passages along the servants' wing. That should bring you to me without too much trouble. We have an opportunity to hurt these bastards, Solithan, so I need you to get here with all possible speed. Understood, sir,
Said Solithan, signing off. Tarvitz froze as he heard a voice say, It won't do any good, Saul. The Precentor's palace is as good as lost. Even you should be able to see that. He looked up and saw Lucius standing in the center of the dome in front of him, his shimmering sword in one hand and a shard of broken glass in the other. He raised the glass to his face and sliced its razor edge along his cheek, drawing a line of blood from his skin that dripped to the dome's floor.
Lucius,
Said Tarvitz, rising to his feet and entering the dome to meet the swordsman.
I thought you were dead.
Bright starlight filled the dome, and Tarvitz saw it was filled with the corpses of Emperor's children. Not traitors, but loyalists, and he could see that not one had fallen to a gunshot wound, but had been carved up by a powerful edged weapon. These warriors had been cut apart, and a horrible suspicion began to form in his mind.
Dead?
Laughed Lucius.
Me? Remember what Loken said to me when I humbled him in the practice cages?
Wary now, Tarvitz nodded.
He said there was someone out there who could beat you.
Do you remember what I told him?
Yes,
Replied Tarvitz, sliding his hand to the hilt of his broadsword.
you said, not in this lifetime, didn't you?
You have a good memory,
Said Lucius, dropping the bloody shard of glass to the floor.